All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to your very first breakout session of the day. I'd like to welcome you all to What's New in SOLIDWORKS CAD 2022 for D2M Extreme presented by Hawkridge Systems. And before we get started this morning, I'd like to give a big shout out to our sponsor for this breakout session, Dassault Systems and SOLIDWORKS. We wouldn't be able to do this without them. So thank you guys so much. And I'd also like to thank my co-host today. We have Patrick Earhart from the Solid Professor team, who is going to be doing a quick session with me at the end of this session to talk about Solid Professor and our new relationship with them. So there's been a partnership between Hawkridge Systems and Solid Professor that I think a lot of you will find very interesting. And then we also have Ryan Navarro from the Applications Engineering team, who is going to be moderating. So just a heads up, guys, if you do have questions, we have the general chat over there on the right that most of you are probably seeing right now. You'll want to make sure that if you do have questions that you're putting those in the Q&A pane. That way we can actually log those questions and get them answered. Time permitting, at the end of this session, we will be doing a little bit of Q&A, so I'll be looking through those for any that either have good answers that everybody should hear about or maybe some that haven't been answered, and we will get to those. My name is Jacob Ames. I'm a senior applications engineer here at Hawkridge Systems, and I'm really excited to share with you some of the new stuff for CAD in SOLIDWORKS 2022. You saw me earlier this morning in the general session. If you did see that, then you know already a little bit of what's coming in this session, but we've only got 50 minutes, so we're going to go ahead and jump right into it this morning with a quick breakdown. Now, this is taken from SOLIDWORKS. My best approximation as to the research and development that went into SOLIDWORKS 2022. And you can see a really big chunk of this is quality and performance. Over 50% of resources, in fact, allocated to quality and performance this year. So if you've been concerned with crashes, with loading speeds, with rebuild times, a lot of that has been improved this year. So really excited. I've noticed that during beta testing and working with PR1, the pre-release, and that's actually what I'm using for this session, it really does not crash as much as what I'm used to, especially in a beta phase. So really happy to see that. We're, of course, going to be focusing on the enhancement side of things and specifically just the CAD side, since that applies to most users. And then we also had a lot of resources go into 3D experience integration. So this is the up and coming next generation of tools for SOLIDWORKS in the 3D experience. And SOLIDWORKS has put in a lot of time and effort to get those tools integrated. So if you'd like to learn more about the 3D experience tools and how that process is coming along, we do have breakouts later on in the day that are going to cover those. I'd suggest you go check them out, get registered, and attend those to get a bit more information. So moving on, we have 5 major categories of enhancements. You heard me talk about these this morning, more than likely. The user interface has a new command search option for the S key. So we'll see that. We can now display planes, the default planes of parts and assembly components very quickly, as well as the temporary axes, and we can swap radial and diameter dimension displays very quickly as well. So little bits and pieces that go a long way to streamlining operations for pretty much everybody. Everyone can take advantage of those UI enhancements. On the sketching side of things, our linear sketch pattern has received some improvements. We can now pattern and copy text. We can use lines as direction references. But usually everybody loves the features, right? We now have coordinate systems with a lot of really good improvements. Parting line draft has a new direction 2 option. The stud wizard is a brand new feature that I like to think of as sort of the inverse of a hole wizard for external threads. The hole wizard itself for slots now has some improvements. New dimension schemes are available. The ability to rotate previews between horizontal and vertical is really big for some users. The mirror command has been updated to support 2 different planes of symmetry, and we have a brand new mesh modeling workflow for those mesh users out there. Then for assemblies, again, user interface enhancements. There's a lot of overlap in there. A lot of the UI enhancements that apply to parts apply to assemblies for moving and mating components. We have some improvements to large design review mode for performance purposes. And my personal favorite, those automatic configuration tables that get created for you as you create configurations. So really exciting stuff there. And then finally, on the drawing side, we can now crop alternate position views, which was a limitation in previous versions. Our templates have been improved so that predefined views can support not only dimetric and trimetric views, but for those of you who work with sheet metal, we can now create predefined views of flat patterns. So probably the most significant piece there is really that flat pattern view for sheet metal users. Our GD&T user interface has been significantly improved and overhauled. And then we have the detailed cut lists, which are now supported in all bill of materials types. So this is a pretty big overview. I don't want to waste too much time here. And what better opportunity than Design to Manufacturing Extreme to build my very own Nimbus off-road unicycle. So this is actually the one that you saw in the video at the beginning of this session. This is the one that I like to use for trails. And I wanted to build this from the ground up. So I have a lot of the components already designed, but we need to assemble them. And we're also going to need some design revisions for strength and consumer configurability. When I initially purchased this unicycle, I was asked, what kind of crank arms do you want? What kind of pedals do you want? What kind of seat do you want? And so we want to give our customers those options as well. We're going to be leveraging SOLIDWORKS 2022 enhancements while we go through this process. And ultimately, we'll be producing a detailed drawing of the finished product for manufacturing. And this will give us the opportunity to show you all these new enhancements. All right, so first things first, our axle design. Our axle is already built into the assembly, but it doesn't have any threads. We're going to need some threads in order to attach the crank arm component. Now, in previous years, we had two major options. We could use cosmetic threads, which were purely cosmetic and graphical that don't actually affect the geometry of the part, which can make mating surfaces complex. We wouldn't have anything to necessarily mate to. On the other hand, we had the other side of the coin, the thread feature that would create full helical threads that were heavy on the system and slow to rebuild, unnecessary in this case. Enter the Stud Wizard. This is our first brand new feature that we're going to look at. This really splits the difference and allows you to create externally threaded studs, either from an existing cylinder body or by placing a new cylinder body, and it runs very similar to the whole wizard. So let's jump over to SOLIDWORKS. You can see here I've got my wheel in place. That's all one component, and then I also have my axle here. And I'm just going to go ahead and open this up in its own part window. I know everybody's excited for the Stud Wizard, as if the name couldn't get any better. As you'd imagine, it's very, very similar to the whole wizard, so you'll actually find it by default underneath the whole wizard command. But this brings me to my first user interface enhancement. A lot of you probably are already familiar with the S key, right? You press the S key, it brings up this context-sensitive shortcut menu. Notice now, in 2022, you can search for commands directly out of that S key. Now, you can always search for commands up at the top right, but who wants to move their mouse that far? Not only can you search for these commands, but you can also add them directly to that S key menu from the search results. So then it's there next time I want to use it. Really super helpful. I know I use the command search all the time, even though I know where things are. And so I really like to see that. There's two modes for Stud Wizard. You can create a brand new stud, or you can use an existing cylinder body. We're going to start by showing how to create a stud on a surface. Notice the stud and position tabs, again, reminiscent to the whole wizard. So we'll choose a face for the stud, and that will create a cylinder body for us. You can see the preview there starts out kind of small. Back to the stud tab, this is where you'll define the actual parameters. What's the diameter and length, right? So we can pop in some values there and just test this out and see how these look. Then your standards. And these are going to be exactly the same as the standards you would see with the whole wizard. You can choose between types, machine threads or straight pipe tap threads. And then you've got your sizes here. And depending on the diameter of the shaft you've chosen, if you've plugged a value in, that will limit the sizes that are available here. So keep that in mind. Then for the depth of the threads, you have a handful of end conditions to choose from. I'll use the through end condition. Undercut is an interesting option too that I encourage you to explore that will remove some material from the underside, but we're not going to use that in this case. Okay, so there's my stud. It's externally threaded. If I put this into a drawing, it's going to give me an annotation just like a cosmetic thread would, but notice how it created that cylinder body. Now I have a nice face to mate to. Of course, I want these threads on the opposite side of this axle as well. So I'm going to start up a mirror command. And this brings me to our second UI enhancement that is one of my absolute favorites of the entire year. Took me a while to get used to, but it's the Q key. The Q key will display all the planes associated with a part at the part level or a component at the assembly level. So when I'm looking for my mirror face or plane, instead of having to use the fly out and dig through this, I can just hover over this component and press the Q key. One piece to look out here for is if you have your hide all types turned on and you press the Q key, nothing's going to happen. Okay, so it doesn't show if the planes are hidden. So keep that in mind. But very quickly, I'm able to specify that plane and go directly to my thread feature, and boom, there's our finished axle. All right, so a couple UI shortcuts there. The brand new stud wizard, we're going to save and close that file, and that'll update in the assembly. That's going to finish up our axle, and we can move on to the next piece, which is our crank design. All right, next piece here. Our cranks are going to come in 3 different flavors. We have our standard steel, that's just a regular old crank. We also want an aluminum version that has a slot cut out for it for weight reduction. And then we want a branded version of the steel crank that's debossed with some branded text. This will give us a chance to see a handful of improvements for reference geometry and some more UI stuff, the whole wizard slot functionality that's been improved, and we're also going to see how linear sketch patterns now support text patterning. So let's go check out a few examples of these. I'm going to start by inserting the crank arm component. So let's get that into place. And what you're going to see here, I'll go ahead and mate this. And I'm not doing anything special here. This is just smart mates using the Alt key, flipping the alignment. And I want to create a copy of this. I also wanted to point out that now, and again, you probably saw this in the general session earlier. Now when you select a component in the design tree, your triad automatically comes up. So again, it's a really small enhancement, but kind of cool that you don't have to use the shortcut menu for this. And you can also copy components by holding Control while dragging a triad arrow. So really simple stuff that can make a bit of a difference there. We'll rotate this component around, get that mated up. And we're going to come back to that because we're going to need to update this. There we go. Now to get these aligned so that they don't spin independently, once again, I'm going to use the Q key while hovering over this, and we've got the top plane here and the top plane here for each crank, and we'll make those parallel. And if I need to flip the alignment of one of them, I can do that right out of the context menu. That's another one of our context menu enhancements. Now with this, there's an important piece to note here. For basic mates like coincident, parallel, which I used here, or concentric, this context menu, as soon as you place a mate, it's automatically going to confirm and disappear. So if you want to use this and you want to be able to flip that mate alignment like I just did, then you need to enable the OK option. To do this, when you go to your customize options, either from the command manager or from the tools dropdown, what you're looking for is in the toolbars tab, there's a checkbox that says show OK button. That needs to be on if you want the opportunity to flip alignment or lock rotation right out of that pop-up menu. But now when I click and drag, they move together. Okay, now we can go back to the crank arm and we're going to make some adjustments here. So on the inside, and we have a few configurations set up, our default configuration is going to be the aluminum version that has some material removed for weight reduction. I'm going to go ahead and start the whole wizard command. And we're going to use the slot mode here, which I already have selected. Notice the slot length is set to 3 inches, but the dimension scheme, we now have 2 options here. This is our first slot enhancement. We now can define the slot length from arc center to arc center, whereas in previous years, you were limited to this, what is now the second option, slot length from arc tangent to arc tangent, so end to end. So just giving you more flexibility. You don't have to go edit the sketch associated with this. And likewise, when we go to the positions tab, and go to place this, I can now press the tab key on my keyboard to toggle between a vertical and horizontal slot. So really easy to do this now, whereas before, if you wanted to do this, you'd have to edit it after the fact and deal with, modifying the sketch, and nobody wants to have to do that. We'll add in a few fillets for manufacturability, and we'll call that configuration good. Now for the steel configuration, I'll go ahead and switch over there. We're going to have that debossed branded text. I want to show how we can now pattern text. And this was simply a limitation in previous years. So I'm editing a construction line sketch that I've got back here, and we're going to add in our own construction line. This is just going to be used as the curve for holding our text. We'll do HRS for Hawkridge Systems, flip that around, and I've got the 3DS font installed on my system. So I think that would be a good look here. Let me find it real quick. There's 3DS. And we'll set the size properly. So that's looking good. And then once that's in place, I'll simply start a linear sketch pattern. We're going to choose entities to pattern, and it now lets you select text. Then we can specify our direction, our spacing, our number of instances. Everything else is the same. Very quickly, we're able to pattern that text. So again, this is nothing super special, right? Because we could have created the feature and then patterned the feature, but we're giving you that flexibility to be able to decide when and how you want to create these. And I know there's at least a few of you out there who are probably pretty excited about that. Then we'll turn this into an extruded cut. Let's flip this around and we'll do a pretty small cut here, 1 millimeter into the material. And then just to make this really stand out, let's throw a painted appearance on it. And we'll do blue in true Hawkridge Systems fashion for the feature. And that's going to look pretty good. So now we have our performance configuration that has the material removed, and we have our branded configuration. That should look pretty good. Now at the assembly level, we're going to want to first make sure some sketches are hidden. So we'll clean this up a little bit. And then I also want to make sure that I have my assembly configurations taken care of. So let's go check out the configuration manager. This is my performance version. So that has the aluminum weight reduced cranks. And then we have standard 20. This is going to be my economic version. Once that's activated, I need to make sure that these cranks are using that steel branded configuration. So we'll swap those over real quick, just using the context menus. And very quickly, we've got 2 different configurations coming to life. I'm really happy to hear we have a comment from Deepak. And welcome, Deepak. Nice to see you. Predefined flat pattern view. So I was expecting some good reception for that. So I'm really happy to hear that that will be getting some good use. All right, moving on to the next piece, we have to talk about our pedals. Usually you have a few different options. You can get plastic, you can get steel, or you can get aluminum, but we still need to have some threads. Well, those will be required to attach to our crank arms, and we need to create that low-cost plastic configuration for our economy model. Your first bicycle probably had plastic pedals. I know mine did, and my first unicycle had plastic pedals as well. So we want to give our consumers a little bit of flexibility. We don't want really high cost for entry. Now, one thing that complicates this process for the pedal is that the pedal is an imported model. It was a step file. And some of you have probably seen this. Imported geometry often has a tendency to result in bad planes, and that can make sketch creation difficult. Now, you can take measurements and recreate planes and force this to work. But we're going to show how you can leverage some really cool new enhancements to coordinate systems to circumvent that process. And this is something that I kind of hid in the general session because I wanted to give you guys some extra value and convince you to be here. So really excited to show that. We're also going to show some enhancements to diameter and radial dimensions, some quick swapping for display options, and that other side of the linear sketch pattern enhancement, which is using lines for direction references. So let's go ahead and get our pedal in place. We'll get that popped in. And then once this is in place, again, notice I don't have any geometry here to mate properly, to get that peg and hole mate with respect to the crank. So this is a situation where when I open the pedal and we need to create those threads, I already have the cylinder body where I want to create those threads. Pressing the S key now, remember from earlier, I added that stud wizard command to this S key. So there it is. I can get right to it. This is where you would use that first mode where you're creating a stud on an existing cylindrical body. So now I just simply choose a circular edge attached to a cylinder, choose my, define my thread characteristics, and boom, there's your thread. It also cuts away some of the material so we have a nice mating surface. This is not something you would get with a cosmetic thread. That's what really makes the stud wizard stand out. Now, we're not quite done yet. I just created this feature, so I need to make sure that it's available and unsuppressed in all the other configurations. I'll use the unsuppress in all configurations option. And now as I cycle through them, we should see that steel, that has threads, and nylon has threads as well. Now the nylon's not complete yet though. We need to fill in some of this open space to give it a little bit of extra strength. But what you'll notice, if I press the Q key once again, those planes are all over the place. Again, really common for this to happen when you have imported files, or maybe somebody on your team who doesn't really know how to sketch on planes properly. I know we all have some of those at work. So when this happens, again, you could recreate those planes, but I want to introduce some new improvements to the coordinate system to simplify this process. Now, first things first, you can now create coordinate systems by inputting numeric values. So what this means is that when you go to reference geometry, create a coordinate system, you have a checkbox, define position with numeric values, and you can just fill these boxes in. Now, I'm going to kind of cheat here. And this isn't something that I would normally recommend. So this is not advice. I am not a lawyer. I'm not an engineer legally. So take this with a grain of salt. But I want to show my mass properties, because this will give me an idea of where my center of mass is. And I'm going to use this to approximate the center of my part and create a coordinate system there. And if this doesn't make any sense quite yet, I promise it will shortly. Create a coordinate system. We're defining this by numeric values, and I'm just going to roughly approximate the X, Y, and Z coordinates for my center of mass. We've got 5.75, negative 6.75 or so, and then 4.25 guesstimating here. And notice what this does when I click OK. It's going to create that coordinate system right near the center of mass. And you might be thinking, that coordinate system looks kind of weird. Let's turn on the visibility there so I can see it better, and I'll hide the component. Notice those little L shapes. You've got the XY plane showing the YZ plane. Those L shapes indicate that you can now use these planes of the coordinate system as reference for sketching, as offsets, whatever you need to do with them. And Ryan Navarro, in fact, created a video on this. And Ryan, I'm not sure if it's released yet or if it's scheduled to be, but he's got a much more detailed video that's coming out on our YouTube channel that will go over a lot of use cases for these. So be on the lookout for that. You can also use the axes, X, Y, and Z axes, as references for, say, circular component patterns or revolved features. So there's a whole lot more capability built into coordinate systems. And in our case, we're going to use that XY plane to start a sketch. I'm just going to sketch out a rectangle, and we'll be filling in that open space with a quick sketch, as long as I can click properly here. There we go. And so I'm really happy to see this improvement to coordinate systems. Historically, coordinate systems aren't something that I used as much as I should. I know Ryan was more of a fan of them, but having to go through and select all those individual references to create them, has always kind of bummed me out. So there's that. Now, the next piece, I want to create some through holes that go through the top of this. This is going to give us an opportunity to check out some of our other improvements to linear sketch patterns. So let's set up some geometry here. And these construction lines that I'm sketching now are going to serve as our direction references. I'm also going to set up my circle. So let's get that sketched out. We'll add in some dimensions. All pretty basic stuff so far. And then I did want to point out one other thing for the circle here. I'm going to set this initially to a diameter of 0.25, but I wanted to point out that now if you need to swap between diametric and radial dimension display, you can do that right out of the context menu. No digging through shortcut menus, no digging through property managers. It's just right here. So you can flip between them, whatever suits your preference. Okay, so super simple, just a nice quality of life enhancement there. All right, now what are we going to do with this? I want to create a diamond shape pattern. And to do that, I'm going to use a linear sketch pattern. But for the directions, I'm going to select my 2 diagonal lines. Now, in previous years, this would add those lines to the entities to pattern. When I choose my circle as the entity to pattern, I can simply fill out my spacing and my number of instances for both directions. And then that should give us some pretty interesting geometry here that would be a lot more difficult to create in previous years. And I'm going to go ahead and create an extruded cut from that. And for direction, I've actually got a plane that I've set up to match the direction of the pedal there. All right, so some nice through holes, and that's going to complete our pedal configuration. Go ahead and check our default steel. Everything's looking good. We can go ahead and close this down, save it. And then I just want to make sure that these are mated up properly. So once again, I'm going to use the Alt key, add some peg and hole mates here. This is going to be our low cost configuration, so I'll swap that over to nylon before I copy it. Just to make this a bit easier, copy this over to the other side. And mate this up. Okay, and then in order to get these pedals to always face the proper direction, what I want to do here is I'll take the faces of the pedals and make those parallel, just to make them look clean. And then I'll take the top plane of the wheel, and I'm going to align the upper face of the pedal parallel to that. That way, when we rotate the cranks, it'll be aligned with the pedal. All right, let's take a look at how we're doing on questions here. Love the enhancements in pattern. That's awesome. Hopefully,
we We had one come in on, this is Ryan here, we had one come in on mirroring. And you were going to cover that in more detail at some point, I think, right? Or
Yeah, we do have a mirror enhancement coming up here pretty soon. In fact, that's going to be one of the very next features that we cover, because we got to bring in the fork. So give me just a couple minutes here and we should be getting to that. If at that point it doesn't resolve the question, definitely ask away and we'll get those answered for you. All right. Any other good questions that we can take a quick look at, or are we doing all right?
I mean, we had some come in. We had, do you need to hold control during pressing the Q key? And that's just a tap, right?
It is. So, and there is some kind of weirdness there. So I'm actually glad you brought that up. If you're using the Q key to make a plane selection, let's say select the front plane, and then I want to select another plane from a different component. So this was a plane from the wheel. Let's say I want to select a plane from the crank now. What I would do is I would take my hands off the keyboard, not holding control. Now I'm going to just press Q while hovering over that crank to show those planes. Now is when you would hold control, because that front plane that I had selected for the wheel is still selected. Now you hold control and select the other plane that you want. And then you can release again, and both of those would then be selected. So there's a little bit of a learning curve. That's a really good question. I promise once you get used to it, you'll be very happy that you did. I actually used the Q key way, way more than I expected. So I think that you will like it. But yeah.
I wanted to add too, Jacob, that's one of the features that switching between multiple versions and going back to 2021, I found myself hitting Q all the time and then it wasn't doing anything.
Yep. It's very frustrating now to go back to 2021. So I would agree with you there. All right, let's go ahead and move on. I want to check our performance configuration. I do need to swap this nylon over to our default. There we go. And we're ready to move on to our next piece. That's going to be our fork assembly. And this is going to go pretty quickly. The fork doesn't really need any special treatment, but I want to show the new mirroring capability. Somebody just recently asked about mirroring, so we'll show that in a second. We're starting off with this axle clamp. The axle clamp needs to be mirrored about a right plane and a top plane at the same time, ideally, right? This is a situation where we have two planes of symmetry, and in previous years, we couldn't do anything with that other than create two separate mirror features and make it work. That's more information to manage. Now we can do this all in one go with the new secondary plane option for mirror features. Additionally, the fork that goes on top of this is going to be welded to the upper axle clamps, and this is all one big multi-body part. This is going to lead into our drawing of this later on down the road for bill of material purposes, because what I want to show is how multi-body parts can be illustrated in bills of materials in a detailed cut list in any BOM type. So that's how we have this set up. That being said, there's not really a lot of work that we have to do here. In the interest of time, I've gone ahead and basically constructed this already. So you've got the axle clamp set up. I'm just going to use the check mark for this because I positioned it so that it would be fixed in the proper position, like so. And when I open this up, you'll find that it's rolled back. Now, rolling forward, watch what happens. This is one single mirror feature right here. And rolling forward, it results in 3 additional instances of the axle clamp body. This is really simple to use. You'll notice now you have your default primary mirror face or plane, and you now have a secondary. If I disabled this or deleted it, it would only give me that one instance. By simply selecting another plane or face, you can get that second plane of symmetry. So really, really helpful here. And that's what gave me these results. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm not sure who asked it, but that's the main improvement to the mirror command. And then this next piece for the upper portion of the fork, this is just an insert part. I inserted it and positioned it with the cut list information. The important piece to recognize here is that the cut list has 9 bodies in it. And I actually went ahead and prior to the session, I filled out the description and the part number. This information is going to come through in the bill of materials. So just pointing that out, that's the reason it shows up properly when we get to the section on drawings. All right, so when I close this down, we'll save the changes. That's going to propagate to the assembly level. So we will update that. And let's go ahead and give our assembly a save as well. Save those just in case. And we're going to move on to the next piece. The next piece is pretty straightforward as well. The seat post and clamp need to be inserted. These are just going to be traditional parts. And I already talked about this earlier in the presentation, so we're going to go over this relatively quickly. Remember how we could flip alignment and lock rotation in the context toolbar. That's what I'm going to reiterate here. Keep in mind, this does have to be enabled in system options, or your basic mates like coincident and concentric will automatically dismiss this and assume that you got the right orientation. So let's get the correct components inserted. We've got the post clamp and the seat post, and we're just going to place those in, choosing the proper configuration. And once those are in position, there is one UI improvement that I really like here that has to do with reference geometry. Now, if you hover your cursor over cylinder or conic geometry, and this might be difficult to see in the screen feed, so I do apologize if that's the case, but simply hovering over cylinders or cones will show you their temporary axes. And I can use these for mating. So I can control select both of those, make them coincident, and this is basically equivalent to a concentric mate. So it's really easy to do that, whereas before you would have to use your view dropdown, you would have to show them, then you'd have to hide them again or create real axes out of them, and it's just not something anyone wanted to do. Using my Q key to access the planes here, I'm very quickly adding a coincident mate. Let's say I wanted to flip the alignment of that. I got my arrows here right in my context toolbar. I can flip the alignment. Again, if you want to make sure that that behavior is available to you, you have to make sure to enable that option. That's going to be in your customize options here in the toolbars tab, and you'll find that show OK button. That's what needs to be on. All right, same thing is true for concentric mates. So if I've got my post clamp here and I do a concentric mate, I can lock rotation. So if I turn on lock rotation out of the context menu, now, of course, I'm only going to have this y-axis movement, which is exactly what I want, right out of the context menu. And I'm just applying some transparency here so I can get a good mate selection, and we'll finish this off with a coincident mate. Okay, so I'm really happy with those. Again, they're really simple improvements, but I know for me, at least, they've gone quite a long ways to making things a bit easier. So we're getting pretty close. The last thing that we need is the seat, right? The seat is a really interesting example for this case study, I think. I'd expected this to be manufactured through plastic injection molding, at least that's what mine appears to be, and then covered in fabric. And there's some foam underneath there as well to make things a little bit more comfortable. But ultimately, no matter how you put it, this is going to require draft in both directions for plastic injection molding. And because of the nature of the seat, the shape, neutral plane draft isn't going to work. We're going to have to create draft around these parting lines due to that organic geometry. New for 2022, we have an enhancement to the parting line mode of the draft command that allows two directions of draft to be specified off of one parting line selection. So in a very similar vein to the new enhancement to mirroring, we can do, basically you're killing two birds with one stone. So that's the idea here. And then I've got some chord width face fillets that are added for aesthetic purposes. So let's go to insert components. Once again, I've got my seat. We'll go ahead and drop that into position. I certainly wouldn't want to sit on that in its current position, but we will go ahead and get that mated up first. So there's that. We'll also want to do the same thing with the right plane. Using that Q key once again. And then to get this flush with the seat post, I'll use a tangent mate. That should do it. And then we'll go edit the seat and see what kind of features we've got going on here. Again, I just rolled this back because it's very easy to show. There's nothing crazy involved with this. Notice how when I roll this forward, we've got a single feature that adds draft in two directions. This is just to prevent you from having two separate draft features to manage. It's less to deal with when you're doing revisions, so on and so forth. All you got to do when setting up parting line draft is enable direction 2. And that'll give you another field to input either a different value, or if you want both those direction values to be the same, both those angles, you can check the box for symmetrical draft and it'll make sure that they always stay the same. Direction of pull, parting line selection, all of that stuff, same as every other year. Okay, so really straightforward. And then I've added some fillets to round off the edges and make this a little bit more comfortable. But we're not quite done. There's one other piece that you may have noticed in the video at the beginning of this session, or maybe in the general session. most off-road unicycles and a lot of freestyle street unicycles have handles on them. We got to be able to control the unicycle a little bit. So we want to incorporate a handle design into this as well. This handle model already exists, but it's in mesh file format, and that can complicate things. If you've used mesh files before with SOLIDWORKS, the features in previous years are really limited. You were limited to Boolean operations, combine, add, subtract, intersect, those types of things. That's no longer the case, or at least we're working toward that. We're going to insert the handle model into the seat, merge the two using combine, and show how the new hybrid mesh modeling workflow will let me retain the original seat geometry in SOLIDWORKS BREP, which is a fancy way of saying boundary representation, or I would call it traditional SOLIDWORKS geometry. But we can now actually blend faceted mesh geometry with the SOLIDWORKS geometry without having to turn everything into faceted mesh. So that's the really cool part here. Additionally, downstream features that you create, like holes, slots, whatever, will result in real geometry in most cases. So I imported the STL file, and a heads up, you will, if you're going to do this, you'll want to save the STL file as a SOLIDWORKS file first, and then it'll keep the mesh geometry, but you can't import STLs directly with the insert part command. So watch what happens here. Notice how I have two bodies. I've got the traditional SOLIDWORKS body and then the mesh file for the handle. I use combine, and it just straight up combines them. But I still have all the original SOLIDWORKS geometry and faces for reference, whatever. It doesn't turn everything into faceted mesh. Additionally, if I were to add a fillet in between these parts, for example, I'll roll that forward and you can see how it's created a faceted mesh face here. Kind of interesting. And then the really big piece to me is that if you create traditional features like holes or extruded cuts, whatever, they result in real SOLIDWORKS geometry. So notice here's a through hole that gives me a temporary axis. Here's an extruded cut that results in a planar face, and I can even sketch on it. These were all things that you would not be able to do in previous years. So for our, however many mesh enthusiasts we have out there, this is definitely worth exploring. This is just a real small snapshot of the capability. I would definitely do some more research on this and see what you can come up with, because you might be able to get some good use out of this. We will close this down, save our changes, and I'm going to go ahead and rebuild. And just to make this look a little bit cleaner, in fact, I'll take my seat, just change that display style to shaded so it looks a little nicer. All right. So that's pretty much going to do it for the design of our unicycle. But with the little bit of time we have left here, I want to make sure that we finish up our assembly and configurations. We've got some other configurations we want to take care of. We want to validate the configurations that we created, and there's some really good improvements to this. But before we get to that, I want to talk about a couple of the assembly improvements that we're not going to get to see here. We have a limited amount of time. There's so many improvements. These are worth mentioning, but I just don't have time to really show them. So I wanted to mention that there's now a configuration property that you can set for parts called exclude from bill of materials. So what this will do is if you set this in a part configuration and then you insert that part into an assembly, it will automatically set the option to exclude from a bill of materials. Once again, you could always exclude a component from a bill of materials, but you would have to do it each and every time for every component instance, which I will be the first to tell you was horrible. Now that it's a configuration property, you can have an exclude configuration that has this enabled. Every time you add it to an assembly, it'll automatically be excluded from a bill of materials, which is really good for consumables or things that are managed in other bills of materials. The other big thing here is performance modes. So when you have a large design review mode, right? That's our big performance mode for very heavy top-level assemblies with thousands of parts. You can now open sub-assemblies of those top levels directly into LDR from the context menu. So just a little shortcut to help you get into LDR for sub-assemblies a lot more quickly. If you have attached drawings, you can also open those in detailing mode. Additionally, and this is the big one, in my opinion, for this year, is the automatic creation and tracking of configuration tables for both assemblies and parts. This is a really great way to create new configurations or validate and verify existing configurations. And this was actually pretty confusing when I was initially researching this, and it might be confusing to you too, because these configuration tables have been around for years. This is not anything new. The new part is that this configuration table, if I go to the configuration manager, check the tables folder, you'll have to take my word for it. I didn't create this. This has been being built up during the entire session. So when I go and show this table, there it is. I don't have to create this. That's always been the toughest part of configuration tables as well. I got to go, choose to configure a component or a sketch or a feature or whatever. Now for both parts and assemblies, it's automatically going to track sketches and features, your components, which components are different per configuration, custom properties, if you have any different custom properties, and if you'd like to see them, you've got your configuration properties, specifically the parameters and options that you choose for those. This nice little user interface, this set of buttons down here, allows you to choose what you'd like to show. So if I'm looking at my configurations and I say, hey, which features or which sketches are different between all of these configurations, I can simply click that button. Oh, here's my cut extrude 1. It's off in standard 20 in this suppressed version, and it's on in the other two. Okay, cool. Right? If I want to see what components are different, here's my standard 20 with the steel cranks, the nylon pedals, right? Here's some different custom properties. I didn't have to create any of this. So I'm really excited about this. Hopefully you are too. And this is a really nice alternative in most cases to design tables. Not everybody can get away from using design tables. This isn't quite as powerful as that, but for basic creation of configurations, it does a really nice job. You may also notice here that there is an off-road configuration that's been hiding out. So if we wanted to see this unicycle in its final form, we could go check that out. And I created this using a 3D texture. So we added some knobby tread to the wheel. 3D textures got a nice enhancement for this year too. Unfortunately, not enough time to dig into that today, but 3D textures are looking better than ever this year as well. So looking pretty good. The very last thing that we want to do with this design is, of course, add in a manufacturing drawing. We want to create some basic views to communicate design intent. Templates now support predefined dimetric and trimetric views. And as I mentioned earlier, those flat pattern views for our sheet metal users. I've seen quite a bit of buzz in the chat about this. That's what I was hoping for and what I expected. Everybody hates having to bring in a sheet metal part and then also create a flat pattern when all you want is the flat pattern. So you can build those into templates now. What we're really going to focus on is the fact that alternate position views can now be cropped. That was one good enhancement. The new symmetric linear diameter dimension and the new GD&T interface. We also have our detailed cut list supported for all bill of materials types. And I should, of course, mention that detailing mode has been improved. We now support older versions of drawings can be opened up in detailing mode. It works kind of like Quick View, if you remember the legacy Quick View, where it will open up drawings whether or not you have the referenced files available. So for 2019 and earlier, before detailing mode was around, we can now open those earlier drawings. And then for creating additional information in detailing mode, you can now create standard views and you can create whole tables. But let's go see what we have for our drawing here. And to save a little bit of time, I do have a completed version of this. So let's go take a look at that. We've got a few sheets I want to take a look at. The first, and this is hard to demonstrate, it's always difficult to demonstrate templates. So again, you'll have to take my word for it. But when I initially created this drawing, these two drawing views were automatically created by the template. These were predefined views. One of them is dimetric, one of them is trimetric. Those were built with predefined views. So that's that one template improvement. Then we have our alternate position and section view here. We can now crop alternate position views. So here's an alternate position view. I can now simply crop it. This is just a limitation from previous years that's gone now. So really nice. I guess you would call that an enhancement, but really it's more of like a removal of a limitation. And then we have our symmetric linear diameter dimension. Again, that's quite the long name, but it's actually a really simple dimension. It's a new dimension type. And what this will allow you to do is select either a cylindrical face. So there's a cylindrical face, or you can select like an axial reference and a point in single mode. And this creates a diametric dimension, but it only gives you 1/2 of the liter. This is really nice for turned components where machinists don't need to see the other side of this. They can say, all right, diameter of 0.625, you got it. Okay. And there's also a multiple mode for this too. So if you have multiple mode turned on, you would specify a common reference like a center line or an axis, right? And then the remainder of your selections would just be where you want to measure from, essentially. So you can very quickly create multiple dimensions and use those for speedy manufacturing while keeping these drawing views nice and clean. So that's your symmetric linear diameter dimension. So you don't have to remember the name, but good idea to remember how it works. Next up, and possibly my favorite, I know it will be your favorite for some of you out there who use GD&T a lot, is the new GD&T user interface. If you remember what this used to look like from previous years, you will know how cluttered this UI used to be. It is much more streamlined now. You're going to pick your tolerance type. So let's say we're doing perpendicularity. You're going to input your range, right? So we'll go ahead and input, a value. You've got your diameter symbols. Everything is nice and categorized for you. You can add datums by simply clicking a button. There's an add new option. And if you need to add additional frames, just click on the plus symbol next to the existing frame. So really straightforward. And I just am amazed at how much more simplified this is. Material conditions are all put together. So, this UI used to be all over the place. And I'm just really happy to see the new updates to this. So I certainly can't teach you how to use GD&T, but for those of you who already do, I know this is going to be really, really helpful, at least from what I've heard from everybody. All right. So what is left? We have our bill of materials. Our last improvement here is in our bill of materials. And of course, we can now create detailed cut lists in any bill of materials type. This was a limitation where if you wanted to use a detailed cut list, which is required for ballooning individual bodies of multi-body parts, remember our fork, each one of these pieces is an individual body. Here's one, here's one, here's one. If we want to balloon those, we need that detailed cut list. And in years previous, we could only create that detailed cut list in the indented bill of materials type. All right. Now we have that checkbox for both parts only and top level only, whichever you prefer. You can simply check that box on, create your bill of materials, and there it is. And you can see those individual bodies. There's a couple different ways to visualize them. Let me collapse these rows. We'll make this a little bit easier to look at here. And you can see those individual bodies in the little preview window that pops up for this. If you prefer to use that, you can use a little flyout here. Each of these is a body of a multi-body part, and you can see that description property. Again, that's why I filled all those out. This was simply not possible before. You would have to use indented in order to get this information. And of course, that's going to enable us to auto balloon this view. Because it's from a back view like this, it's not going to get everything with auto ballooning. But if I use a single balloon and grab one of these individual bodies, we can clearly see how this relates to one of the bodies of the multi-body part. So I was pretty excited to see this. I use multi-body parts a lot. If you're using weldments, if you're using sheet metal, multi-body parts in general, you could certainly take advantage of this. All right. And that, my friends, is our final enhancement for the session. So to do a quick recap here, our user interface, we saw the new command search built into the S key. We saw the Q key in order to display planes. And we saw how hovering over cylinder faces or conic faces will show the temporary axes. We can also now swap radial and diameter dimension display. So big user interface enhancements. As far as sketching is concerned, all the enhancements were really for the linear sketch pattern. We can use lines as direction references. We can now pattern and copy text. For features, lots of good ones this year, lots of really good enhancements. Coordinate systems are better than ever. You can create them with numeric values. You can also leverage their axes and planes that result from them as references or for sketching or for anything else you can think of. Really, really excited to see that. Our parting line draft and our mirror commands now support a second direction. We got the brand new stud wizard feature that's very similar to the hole wizard, but for external threads. And the hole wizard saw some improvements to the slot mode. And then finally, for features, we have a brand new workflow for mesh modeling called hybrid mesh modeling that will allow you to use those mesh models more effectively. We also have, for assemblies, UI improvements in general, LDR improvements, that large design review performance mode, and automatic configuration tables. And then finally, for drawing, we can crop alternate position views. Templates were improved. Our GD&T user interface was overhauled, and those detailed cut lists are now supported in bills of materials. So I hope you all enjoyed this session. That is just about going to do it for our time today, but I do want to invite you to learn even more, because even this whole 50-minute session is really just scratching the surface. There is so much more that goes into every year with SOLIDWORKS, and there's tons of other enhancements that weren't discussed here. The SOLIDWORKS What's New page is a really great resource that's up to date now, as well as the help file for full documentation of all of these enhancements. And by the way, this PowerPoint that I've been going through is available. I have a cleaned up version that's available for download. If you, I believe, and it's hard to describe because I can't show you on the screen share, but if you go to the lobby where you joined this, you should be able to look for attachments or handouts and download this, and then you'll have access to those links. If not, a simple Google search for these terms will help you find them. Additionally, Hawkridge Systems is going to be uploading articles and videos covering these enhancements to our blog and our YouTube channel. In fact, we've already started that process, so check those out. And the last thing that I would highly recommend is to consider professional self-paced training, update training for SOLIDWORKS 2022 through Solid Professor. And for that, we actually have Patrick Earhart from the Solid Professor team to speak a little bit more about the new partnership between Solid Professor and Hawkridge Systems and help you understand what update training is, how it can help you, and what other resources Solid Professor has to offer. Patrick, are you with us?
Yep, just starting up my camera right now.
All right, thanks, Patrick. I'm glad you could make it. So I know that Solid Professor has been around for a long time. You've been with Solid Professor for how long?
About 6 years at this point.
So quite a long time. You've seen Solid Professor really come into its own, and as far as being the premier platform for self-paced learning. I know that when I was getting ready to interview to work with Hawkridge Systems 6 years ago myself, I actually used Solid Professor to get ready to work or try to work at Hawkridge Systems. So can you tell us a little bit about what update training is and what our users are going to get out of it?
Yeah, update training on the Solid Professor site is going to be a short course with short videos, 3-5 minutes max, that are going to focus on a single feature and enhancement and really break it down. So you're not going to need any context of anything else. It's just going to dive into how to use this feature in the new way, such as the stud wizard. We'll dive into all of the things that you can do with it and all of the options available.
That's great. So none of the extras that we have to deal with. No like and subscribe. No hit that notification bell. That's nice. So, and I know, if I'm not mistaken, you do have update training way back too, right?
Yeah, we've got update training courses all the way back to 2007. So if you're upgrading from 2018 to 2022, you can watch 4 or 5 years in a row and see what all of the major enhancements that you missed were.
Very cool. I know that's one of the most common questions we get when our customers are doing an upgrade. Hey, can you tell us what's changed over the last couple of years? And when it's been that long in between, they're doing a 3-year upgrade. Even with us as applications engineers, it's hard to remember. So that's really nice to hear. Now, beyond update training, you're not just that. I know there's a lot of other modules as well, and lots of other videos. What else can you tell us about, what types of coursework can be found on Solid Professor?
We've got coursework for everything in SOLIDWORKS that you can think of. We've got everything from basic intro and essentials up through advanced part modeling, up through surfacing, CSWP prep. And then we have additional, for example, that smartphone case design that's more of a look at a specific project, as opposed to a more concept-based approach of like, how does this tool work?
So case studies and actual industry examples.
Exactly.
Right. Cool. Well, I know that a lot of our users are probably excited about the prospect of getting their hands on this, getting ready for, if you're in pursuit of SOLIDWORKS certification, at the professional or the expert level, a lot of you may already have access to the Solid Professor platform. Because of the new partnership between Hawkridge and Solid Professor, the elite level subscription to SOLIDWORKS through Hawkridge Systems entitles you to access the Solid Professor platform, and you get everything with that subscription, right, Patrick? It's not a pay as you go thing. It's all
correct. Yeah, you get all of it. You get every SOLIDWORKS course, as well as things like GD&T. We've got some FEA training. Everything is available to you.
That's fantastic. So for those of you who are wondering, do I have this? Is this available to me? You can always reach out to us if you want to find out. You may already have access. If so, we can help get you set up on the platform. If not, we can help get you set up with the membership required to access Solid Professor. But Patrick, thank you so much for being with us. Really excited to see how update training turns out for SOLIDWORKS 2022. And thanks again.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks.
I appreciate it. All right, everybody, it is about that time. We have some time for a Q&A. We've got about 5 minutes left before I have to cut everybody loose. We don't want you missing your next breakout session, but let's see what we got for Q&A. It looks like Ryan has done an amazing job. We had 11 answered questions. Thank you, Ryan.
There was a couple I wanted to repeat, which was we had a question on the Q key, and if you have that hide all types on, does it still work?
It does not. That's a really good question. So let me bring up another model here. I think everybody should still be able to see my screen. And if you have hide all types on, or even beyond that, if you for any reason have planes disabled, so if view planes is turned off and you try to use Q, it's not going to work. So those planes have to be on. If they're turned off, or if hide all types is turned on, that's usually the most common what happens. Hide all types will be enabled there when that little eyeball background is gray, and you try to use Q, you're not going to get anything. So first things first, if you try to use Q and it doesn't work, that's the first thing that I would check. Are my planes actually visible? That's a really good question. And same thing like as far as the Q key goes with using control, remembering that your first selection, you don't have to use control. And then you don't want to hold control while you're using Q, or that will give you a full rebuild, which might not be good for a very large assembly. So just hover over, press Q. There's the rest of the planes. Now you would hold control and select the other plane that you need for reference or mating or whatever.
And the other one I wanted to point out was, does the secondary mirror work on sheet metal parts? And I just wanted to say that I tested that out, and it seems to work pretty great, even on a quarter model of a sheet metal body, and
good.
Basically patterning it around to a full part. So
thank you for testing that out, because I had not tested that out. I haven't done a lot of sheet metal work in beta, but that's great to hear. I am glad to hear that, because I don't imagine why it wouldn't. But every once in a while in beta, there's a little bit of inconsistency. So that's good to hear. Very good. All right. I see one other open question here. Does the GD&T enhancement also include ISO GPS? That is a really good question, probably for somebody who isn't me, because I am not a GD&T expert. So even if I could see it, I don't know if I would be able to tell you. We can look at the user interface again. Ryan, perhaps you might be able to tell me, does this, let's say we build in another frame. I know that this GD&T tool is ISO compliant as far as standards are concerned, but I don't know that there's anything specific to, force you into ISO standard. Am I understanding that question correctly? Hopefully.
Yeah, I think we'll probably just have to circle back on that one to figure out.
Okay. Yeah, because I know that our whole tool in general, the SOLIDWORKS platform, can be used for ISO, to meet ISO requirements. But as far as I know, the GD&T tool doesn't have anything specific to ISO, although we do offer the tools to, to meet that standard if needed. What is the command going to be called for Q? I currently have Q programmed to do something else. Oh, that's a good question. You know what? Let's go take a quick look at our key bindings here. Let me swap back, because we definitely want to get this one answered. Let me swap back to my part, because I can go look at my existing key bindings before we get into this. I'll go to keyboard, and we're going to go to all the commands that have shortcuts, and we're going to look for our Q key. There's the G key. There's Q. So it's going to be the category. And if you want to screenshot this real quick, Emmanuel, you can go ahead and do so. But it's going to be the categories and others. But the command is called primary and reference planes, coordinates, and it looks like origins. So that's not, doesn't quite roll off the tongue, but you may want to screen cap that real quick for reference, because that key binding will move, as you upgrade, will move forward. All right, so I want to thank everyone once again. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for Q&A today. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed. Find me on LinkedIn, find Hawkridge Systems on LinkedIn, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much. See you soon.